H.R. 1 is one of those things that as soon as Speaker Pelosi became Speaker again, you guys did this, and then because Mitch McConnell is in charge of the Senate, we stopped talking about it. So it seems like H.R. 1 would fix a lot of what's broken. Tell us what's in the bill and how it would help fix those issues.
Zerlina, it's a transformative bill. First of all, it would get rid of gerrymandering. Second, it would make sure that we got rid of big money in politics and actually helped uplift small dollar donors. Third, as you were talking in your previous segment, it has a lot of the protections for voter rights. What does that mean? You can't automatically get rid of people from your voter rolls. You can't close down polling places in disproportionately black and brown communities. So the bill is campaign finance reform, redistricting reform, and voting rights reform all put together.
The bill has support of all House Democrats. What the heck is the reason why Republicans oppose this bill? It seems like practical things to make it easier for Americans to participate. And you would think Republicans would want more people to be able to participate because they could actually get more of that percentage of the vote. I mean, they could get more votes if they allowed more access.
Zerlina, they're, as you know, doing the exact opposite as they're doing in Georgia. I mean, they fear that more people voting isn't in their interest. Now, it's actually a factually incorrect assumption. I mean, there are places where actually having everyone vote would actually help the Republican Party, but they are so fearful of having new people vote, and let's just be frank, people of color vote, that basically they are restricting any effort to make that easier.
Were you surprised that the first thing they did when they lost in states like Georgia and Arizona is to introduce bills to make it more difficult to vote? You know, it's bizarre, but I suppose unsurprising, and I'm wondering if you were shocked.
Well, it's a commentary of the modern Republican Party. And, you know, the natural response if a party loses and loses badly in a demographic is to say, what are we doing wrong? Maybe we ought to find or field a candidate who can connect with that demographic. And by the way, that's what the Republicans used to do. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of things that President George W. Bush did, but we have to remember he carried 40% of the Latino vote. But the Republican Party now it's almost like they're waving the white flag. They're no longer saying, let's make that effort. And so now all they're left with is, well, let's make it harder for those communities to vote. It's really sad. I wish the Republican Party would field candidates who would be competitive in those demographics. We'd have a much healthier democracy.
Absolutely. We need functioning parties on all ends of the spectrum. One thing I don't understand, and this is just, it's because of math. I feel a lot like this is just racist, right? And as a black person, when I see them trying to restrict Sunday voting, right, early voting on that Sunday before Election Day, which we know is when souls to the polls happens, when black churches, you know, turn out large numbers of black voters. And when I see them take that day away, I go, wow, that's just racist. Like, and we remember those things. Is it ultimately, in the long term, maybe they're able to be successful in the short term, but in the long term, is this just a racist strategy by Republicans? And should we call it that? Because in the long term, I think they're going to turn off a lot of black and brown voters by doing this kind of suppression.
Zerlina, it is racist to target Sundays and say, don't vote on Sundays. And it's actually worse than racist, as you know, it's historically ignorant. It's ignorant of the role that the church has played in the Black American experience at a time of slavery, where the church was often the only institution or place that African Americans could go for any sense of empathy on suffering, and the role the church played for justice and civil rights. And so the church is so integral to the African American experience. Anyone, and you know, I just know this basically reading high school history. And then to target that, it's a insult to the history of the African American community. And so I think it's not only going to turn off black and brown communities, I think it's going to turn off anyone who has any knowledge of American history.
I hope people are paying attention. What do you think, you know, the message should be to the folks at home who they may not be aware that this is even happening. I mean, sometimes people stop paying attention to politics once the election has happened, but it's important to always pay attention because things like this happen. They may try to restrict your access to the ballot box or restrict your access to reproductive health care. So how can regular folks at home, maybe they engaged before the election, but then they were like, all right, I just want to sit around and play with the dog. I don't know, whatever, because we're in a pandemic and you can do whatever you want. What's your advice to them in how to engage on the issue of voting access? Because it seems like, you know, it's a specialty kind of issue that maybe Stacey Abrams cares about every day, but the average citizen may not understand why it's so critically important.
Well, I understand the fatigue that people have felt after 4 years of fighting Donald Trump and after this election, and then after we won the election, having to fight to save our democracy so that the election counted. I understand people are tired, but what we have to realize is we're still in a battle for the soul of our democracy. There are people who are uneasy with us becoming the multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy that we are going to become. And Stacey Abrams has been a visionary in leading that fight, but she can't do it alone. And she'd be the first to say that we have to have community activism everywhere. I guess I would just say, you know, I was reading recently Frederick Douglass's 1869 speech, Composite Nation, where he stands up for Chinese immigrants back then, talks about becoming a multiracial democracy. And I take inspiration from all these people who fought for these rights and sacrificed so much. So if all we have to do is be vigilant about guarding our voting rights, it's tough, but not nearly as tough as those who sacrificed before us.
Right now, Elizabeth McDonough might be the most powerful person in Washington. McDonough is the Senate parliamentarian, and it is her job basically to decide how much Democrats can do for COVID relief under the Senate's special fast-track rules. Democrats want to keep an increase for the minimum wage in the bill. Republicans want to block it. McDonough listened to staffers for the two sides today as they argued it out. We're expecting her decision anytime now on Capitol Hill. The proposal for a $15 minimum wage came from the Biden-Harris White House. It's popular with progressive lawmakers and in polls. But it's not clear that Democrats can get to the $15 minimum wage without Republican support in the Senate or without a compromise.
The president put $15 minimum wage, an increase in his package, because that's what he believes the increase should be.
Senator Sanders has said there's no room for compromise. Does the president think there's room for compromise on that $15?
Well, the compromise will be between members of the Senate who make disagreement on where the minimum wage should sit and what the process should be.
Democratic Congressman Khanna has been an outspoken supporter of the $15 minimum wage, and we've had this conversation many, many, many times, and he's back with me now. Why is raising the minimum wage such a partisan issue? Drives me nuts.
I don't understand why it's partisan. I mean, the American minimum wage right now is $7.25. I've asked my Republican colleagues, in what constituency can you live on $7.25? And I don't understand this argument of let's make it regional. Are they really saying that Amazon should pay $15 for the same job in California, but they don't want people in rural America to get paid $15 by Amazon for the same exact job? Why should people in other communities be paid less? I mean, let's have a national standard of paying people what they deserve.
Absolutely, and it seems to me that people that normally oppose increasing the minimum wage, they use the argument that it's a job killer or it would hurt businesses. But oftentimes the people making that argument have never worked to live and worked to put food on the table. I mean, really worked jobs where it was paycheck to paycheck, right? A lot of times the people making this argument, they are the business owner. They're in Congress now, but they were a business owner, so they're not even the worker. Do you think that the effect on businesses is as valid a concern as it's made out to be when we have this conversation every year or so?
Well, Zerlina, I appreciate how you turned the tables, because that's exactly the Republican attack. You've never run a business, and I think you're right to point out that there are a lot of people who haven't ever had to work in ways of survival. I mean, I haven't had to work. I've had minimum wage jobs, but not in a way where my actual survival depended on it. And when you talk to people like that, they'll tell you that you can't survive on less than $15 in any part of this country. The jobs issue is certainly not an issue for big corporations. It's not an issue in many small towns where you have high concentration. There are economic studies showing in high concentration areas actually raising the wage adds employment. It is potentially an issue for certain small businesses that have suffered with the pandemic. And for those, we ought to help with tax credits and support. And President Biden's COVID relief package actually targets billions of dollars for those small businesses. So if you want to have an honest conversation about how do we make sure that the wage increase doesn't hurt small businesses, let's have that conversation. But they're being disingenuous because they're not coming up with proposals for that.
Absolutely. And so we mentioned that the Senate parliamentarian today heard the arguments about whether or not this minimum wage increase can stay in the COVID relief bill under Senate rules. And if it is allowed, you would need every Senate Democrat to vote yes. Do you see a path to getting that? It feels like, you have a couple of the more moderate Democrats in the Senate, and you have moderates in the House as well, who are, this isn't their favorite idea, but it feels like you can't go home to West Virginia and say, I got you guys less money. Look at me work. Like, I don't see how a politician being able to make that argument to their constituents.
Well, Zerlina, I completely agree with you. 2 points to this. First of all, I have a lot of respect for the Senate parliamentarian. She's a professional. But the fate of millions of Americans shouldn't be decided by one person who's not elected or confirmed to anything. The Senate parliamentarian's job is to give advice. It's actually the head of the Senate, which is Vice President Harris, who has that decision. And Vice President Rockefeller in 1975 overruled the Senate parliamentarian. So we should make sure that the $15 minimum wage is in there. And then here's my belief. I don't think there's a single Democrat in the House or the Senate who's going to vote against President Biden's first major bill. Progressives do this all the time. I've voted for every single COVID relief bill up till now in Congress. I've had major disagreements with a lot of provisions in all of them. But at the end of the day, I voted for them. And by the way, progressives at the end of the day are going to vote for what the president puts. And I think so will moderates. So this argument that you're going to have people vote against the president's first bill, I just don't think that makes sense.
That's actually a point that I had not heard made yet, and it's a very persuasive one. Do you want to be the lone senator to oppose the relief bill under the president who is in your party? We'll see. Republican senators Romney and Cotton, absolutely. Republican senators, they're out with their own idea. Romney and Cotton are offering a compromise for a $10 minimum with tighter immigration enforcement, which again, feels like they're not reading the room. Is that even something you as a progressive lawmaker would consider as a viable policy that you would support?
No. First of all, why are you introducing restrictive immigration issues into a policy of a minimum wage? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense to try to use that vehicle to advance your cultural agenda. And secondly, if you're really going to be raising the wage, let's raise it to $15. I don't understand why a $10 putting that into law. So this is just trying to put something out there so they look like they're doing something, but they're not fooling anyone. And it's a reminder.
Yeah, it feels to me that offering.
I was just going to say it's a reminder. Every time I sort of think about, oh, well, Mitt Romney is not that bad. This is a reminder why I worked my heart out to beat him with President Obama, and glad that President Obama did, and why he never became or will become president of the United States. Because as much as he has some sense of decency on our rule of law, he's totally out of touch on economic issues.